Andrej, first hour is yours, or first 45 minutes is yours.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thanks. Let me just share my screen. Do you see it? Is it?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, excellent. Let's quickly adjust this. Okay, good. First, yeah, I want to thank Negar for this because it. You know, I've been thinking about these things, but until you get an assignment, you don't really feel like, you know, really truly spending time thinking. So I'm grateful, Negar, and I'm grateful to Seth for you know, bringing all these people together in this way and making it into not just a one-way presentation, but also discussion and conversation. So I'm hoping that in the third part we get to talk to possibly all of you. So let me start. Just a word on the title of this talk. The curious term allagmatic. It comes from allagma in Greek. That means change and vicissitude, but it can also mean that which can be given or taken in exchange, which more genuinely captures the idea that Stavros was describing in Simondonian terms of the energy and information exchange. And he will also, in his book on the topic, define it as the theory of operations, which is complementary to the theory of structures that the science is elaborate. On the same page that is listed here, he also defines it an operation as a conversion of a structure into another structure. And I underscore this because it seems that Allagmatics, or the theory of operations, has been a blind spot to architects who have proverbially been addicted to the idea of structure and structuralism. So in other words, probably we have become sort of experts on the idea of on the topic of meteorology, that is to say, part to whole relationship, but we are yet to maybe get a proper apprenticeship in the idea of how parts and boundaries are being constructed and negotiated, and that falls under the topic of Meteor Topology. So I want to argue in favor of Meteor Topology to somehow augment or replace the idea of simple part-to-whole relationship as described in the term meteorology. So, and this is just to explain why and how. So this explains what Alfred North Whitehead, the champion of philosophy of process, describes as the fallacy of simple location. So let's just give you an example. As you arrive on campus, you may ask yourself, where exactly is TU Delft? Is it in the Faculty of Architecture, or perhaps in the library, or in the aula? And this is exactly how the philosopher Gilbert would illustrate a category error where the property of an entity is confused with the whole. The point of this illustration that I'm making is not to justify the necessity of scrupulous logical taxonomy so that we can exactly delineate where the university might be, but to highlight the eternal problem of the relations of parts to wholes, also known as meteorology. So I'll be claiming that the nesting of spatio-temporal relations is quintessentially an architectural problem that I will try to show. And if we take this Ra's caution seriously, we can actually begin to doubt that there has ever been a simple way to account for any clear-cut delineation, let alone the one between data and the city. After all, the city exceeds or even transcends any agglomeration of its parts, including the buildings. By the same token, particular buildings, such as our faculty, are not merely subsumed under the higher general order of the city or the university. They are literally constitutive of it. So there is a kind of reciprocal determination which inevitably calls for adopting Simondonian theory of Allagmatics. Such mutual presupposition begs a question which is at once naive and deeply thought-provoking: why things have outlines. And it is precisely what the anthropologist and cybernetician Gregory Bateson does in his metalogs. And this is how he enacts a conversation between a father and a daughter. And I'm not going to do it in two voices. So, daughter, Daddy, why do things have outlines? Do they? I don't know. What sort of things do you mean? I mean, when I draw things, why do they have outlines? Well, what about other sorts of things? A flock of sheep, conversation, do they have outlines? Don't be silly. I can't draw a conversation. I mean things. Yes, I was trying to find out just what you meant. Do you mean, why do we give things outlines where we draw them? Or you mean that things have outlines whether we draw them or not? I don't know, Daddy. You tell me. Which do I mean? I don't know, my dear. There was once angry artist, a very angry artist, who scribbled all sorts of things down. And after he was dead, they looked at it in his books, and in one place they found he'd written, wise men see outlines and therefore they draw them. But in another place, he'd written, madmen see outlines and therefore they draw them. But which does he mean? I don't understand. Well, William Blake, that was his name, was a great artist and a very angry man. And sometimes he rolled up his ideas into little spitballs so that he could throw them at people. So the spitball is difficult to dodge. Once the law of the excluded middle, where either this or that, is unwittingly appropriated, it is very hard to accept that the outline might be ambiguous, that is to say, beyond the binary oppositions of either or. Those accustomed to representational thought, where difference is subordinated to identity and movement to stasis, find all of these rather counterintuitive. Yet, and this is what I'm going to argue, the whole is not of the parts. It would be the case in any structuralist theory, but it's alongside them. There's a certain autonomy on the part of the whole, so to speak. And so it's not about the gestalt, the distinction between the figure and the form. It's about how far does the action or operation reach. So the multiple information can be extracted from the same set of data. And I give you one definition, and this is to do with the subtitle of this presentation, that the things that you already tackled in the previous session, that we cannot equate data with information. So this is one definition by Brockman, who says a raindrop that hits the ground behind you contains no information. The raindrop that hits you on the nose has information. And according to him, information is a measure of effect. This comes very close to, I mean, this to me immediately qualifies as, to be seen in terms of this, what I want to call, following Eric Horrell, generalized pragmatism, a kind of subspecies of process ontology. And to spice it up, I include also the Gregory Bateson's famous definition, where he says information is a difference that makes a difference. So we are talking about the non-totalizing whole, the necessity to engage in a kind of, not what we would consider to be analysis of something that is over there and me over here as a scholar trying to figure out what is going on, but what Deleuze and Guattari called schizoanalysis, which is about not simply observation from afar, but intervention into the causal fabric of reality, or what Karen Barad would, call in, that very title of her book, Meeting the Universe Halfway. So, and I mentioned already Gilbert Ryle, and Gilbert Ryle is the one who distinguished between these two kinds of epistemologies, the knowing that, the propositional knowledge. We know that it's Thursday, it's 9:30 or so, and this is all propositional knowledge, but knowing how is a very different species. And I think it was Negar who mentioned the book of Keller Esterling, what is it called? Medium Design, the latest book. And she devotes quite a substantial part of her book to the distinction between the knowing that and knowing how. And knowing how is this non-discursive knowledge, kind of embodied knowledge, and it always brings to mind, at least to me, the one possible mistake in the first Matrix movie that you see a clip from here. So 1999, mind-blowing. But there was one occasion where she, by she I mean this lady whose name escapes me now, is asked whether she can fly a helicopter, and then she says, "Give me a second," and then she downloads all the instructions. And I was not convinced even then, because I was thinking, it's one thing to figure out all the characteristic properties and everything that can be known about the helicopter, but to fly a helicopter, it demands this kind of intervention to switch from the if-then mode to the what-if mode, precisely because you need to kind of see what happens if I do this, if I do that, and the only way to tie the sensory motoric kind of to bind together the sensory and the motoric, so as to be able to fly the helicopter or so. So this is what I want to say, that propositional knowledge is real, but it's very different from the embodied knowledge of knowing how. I'm belaboring the point, but you cannot be expected to learn how to swim if you're given a manual. You need to throw yourself, your body, into the water so as to kind of feel its viscosity, to figure out what is it that you can do with your style of propelling, depending on your particular joints, the way you kind of negotiate this by way of employing your capacity of your body. So there has been a lot of discussion on how it would be necessary for us to expand our architectural thinking beyond the very physicality of architecture or anything to do with measurable set of data that it concerns architecture. And one possible avenue is charted by Rosalind Krauss with her canonical essay by the name of Architecture in the Expanded Field. Many people thought, okay, we should do this also for architecture in the expanded field, so it's not just like walls and streets and buildings. So now I give you the most expanded way of the most expanded take on architecture possible. And this is the cosmic calendar that was it was proposed by this gentleman here by the name of Carl Sagan. What he proposed to consider the whole of time ever since the Big Bang, 13.8 billion years ago, to compress it into a so-called cosmic calendar, to give us a sense of how time is distributed. So if we consider the Big Bang to be the 1st of January of this cosmic calendar, we now, as I speak, find ourselves in the last seconds of the 31st December, of the last minute of the 31st December. So that means that every month is close to 1.25 billion years. Every day is 40 billion years. So like a fast-forward movie that lasts for 1 year, in order to capture all the developments and events of 13.8 billion years. So if as you see here, and you can check this. I mean, it's really nice, and I think even video clips. I watched it as a kid. This was like the same. The title was Cosmos, and the book was published eventually. There are also, Stavros tells me, more contemporary versions of it, but I like this one very much, because as you see here, multicellular life does not appear until very late in December. So if we go here and so out of these 12 months, we focus only on December. You see, this is the month of December. You realize that the dinosaurs were, for example, extinct on the 30th of December. So 1 day before the final day of the calendar year. And now I will not, I mean, you can check this for yourself. I find it particularly amusing, but I want to focus on the very final day. So the 31st, and let's zoom in, because there's something that I think might be of importance to us from the point of view of Datapolis, namely this thing that happens at 10:30 p.m., where suddenly human brain starts mushrooming, encephalization is accelerated. And I want to underscore this moment because this is probably triggered. I mean, the whole of this, the whole of history can be seen as getting better at developing and producing of organs. So, for example, we can have, you know, like the eye is perfected, and we share this design with other animals and birds. But there is a particular exception in this, in evolutionary terms, at 1030, with this idea of not really being limited to the production of organs within the body itself, but making organs that are inorganic. And this sounds really paradoxical. So, but the moment that we made the first flintstone, that could be seen as the moment that we exteriorize our organs or exorganize ourselves, so as to produce something that now is inorganic, and yet it belongs, and of course it calls for a particular kind of production of knowledge, because now we have to see how to engage with it, but also provides for the what I would cautiously call a moment of transcendence, in the sense that we the development of that line of evolution does not literally depend on our biological shelf life. I mean, it goes beyond our our finitude. That is to say, the flintstone is out there, and it could be considered as a kind of memory that exceeds lives of particular people. So it's transgenerational, and it triggers a kind of necessity to engage in a kind of knowledge that was previously perhaps unknown. And this is beautifully illustrated in probably what turns out to be my favorite clip of all times. And this is the moment in Kubrick's Odyssey 2001, where he compresses this 4.4 million years in a single cut. So the exosomatization or exoorganization, the first time that we use the bone as a tool, and to morph it into a satellite, which is to say that there is not a difference in kind between these two artifacts, and I call them artifacts because this is what they are. Perhaps the difference is only a difference in degree rather than in kind. And even if I can't finish this presentation, I would ask you to indulge me, and I'd like to show you this clip, because I think it will. I prepared it literally 1 minute, I think. So let me see. I have to stop sharing this and go maybe here. Let me just go back to my PowerPoint. Yes, so I'm very glad that also Bob is in the room, because we have had a very heated, long debate last Monday in the PhD seminar whether, you know, I'm now being can be accused of advocating a sort of exceptionalism, human exceptionalism. But I would like to word this kind of off by saying that what I'm concerned about with here is the idea of radical auto-affection. The fact that this, once we exteriorize it, that could be identified as the point of bootstrapping. It provides for evolution, albeit by other means. So let's continue with this idea of the cosmic calendar, and now we zoom in on the very final minute of the cosmic calendar, and as you can see here, there are cave paintings. It seems to me that we have a plethora of proof that once the genie is out of the bottle, that we have reduced another kind of memory, the memory that does not really die when we die. And this is what we mean by this epiphylogenetic lineage, mnemonic, which comes from Stigler. We really, I think it's possible to talk about the evolution by means other than life. And this is extraordinary moment of bifurcation right here. And maybe this also calls for the distinction between these two gentlemen, the tradition, and I don't want to see them in terms of opposition, but I just want to see them as two, by providing a very different way of understanding what is it that evolution, how it works. And as we know, Charles Darwin, or perhaps Darwinism, vulgar Darwinism or neo-Darwinism, has overemphasized the idea that we simply adapt to what is already there. So the gene selection is done on the basis of what is found. And neo-Lamarckism, and I'm inflecting it already, it says that, I mean, the originally, Lamarckism says that the change is possible within one human, within the human life. It doesn't take a long accumulation for change to occur. But I want to see it here from the point of view of epiphylogenesis, in the sense that, it's not that we simply adapt to what is already there, but we build cities, and therefore we construct our existential niches. We don't simply occupy them as something that is already, something that is ready-made. We actually build them, and you see the connection with the Flintstone. We are not. This is not a passive conception of evolution. It is active in the sense that we also get to manipulate our environment, and by manipulating, we inevitably change who we are. So that's what I meant by the auto-affective moment of bootstrapping, and that's what Stigler means when he says the what makes the who, because it's not just the who that produces the tool; it's the very tool, the what, that produces a certain kind of anthropogenic line. That rather than something else. So in some way, you could say that this is an issue that can be described as the, in this kind of reciprocal determination between the matter and the manner, where matter, as we know, is finite, but what is virtually unlimited is the manner. By manner, I mean the style. And this is something that I've written. So indulge me a little extract from my piece by the name of Evolutionary Architecture, where I remind ourselves that we have the difference between the first and the second law of thermodynamics, conservation of matter and energy, which stipulates that matter and energy cannot be created or destroyed. So that's what I meant by it's finite. They can be transformed, and energy can be converted from one form into another, but the total equivalent amounts to of both must always remain constant. So matter and energy always constant. The second law of thermodynamics, which is also called entropy, is something completely different, because it provides for this spontaneous change of itself, and it tends to dissipate so as to, it's also known as the disorder eventually wins, the heat death. I think you touched on this already in the previous session, that again, the reciprocal determination of the sense as a direction and sensibility as the capacity to sense. The more we can sense, the more we, let's say, have the capacity to also revalue for the revelation of all the values, because they're never fixed or immutable. And it's interesting to see. So I started off by saying that the matter and energy are constant, but there is a possibility to temporarily defer the inevitable entropic tendency. And some people, most notably Schrödinger, believe that this is perhaps the best description of what life is. So life, in his understanding, would be this temporary deferral of, again, entropic tendencies. And curiously, it is this loophole that allows for the possibility of life and mind. I find this beautiful. And this is known as so entropy. This is known as life is negantropic in that sense. Perhaps a more accurate way would be to call it counter-entropic, because you're not really negating entropy. Entropy is still there, but it's slightly deferred, it's inflected. And that's what Stigler was proposing for the project of Negan Topology, which is a project to somehow avoid the entropy and think about the ways of producing knowledge and proper knowledge that he somehow shorthand for this is Negan Topology in his way. This is related, obviously. I like this is, you probably recognize, or some of you recognize, Brian Eno, who is a thinker. He's a musician first and foremost, but he also is interested in all issues related to aesthetics and also philosophy. And I strongly recommend his work. He's a very curious mind who does not really, proper transdisciplinary thinker who doesn't really care. He trespasses all the time, goes to different areas. And this is his definition of culture from a book, A Year with Swollen Appendices. Actually, this is one appendix. They're very short, but very crisp and beautiful. This is what he has to say about culture. I associated here with the idea of the non-productive production. So to actually argue that the intensity comes before function. So he says, culture is everything we don't have to do. We have to eat, but we don't have to have cuisines. We have to cover ourselves against the weather, but we don't have to be so concerned as we are about whether to put jeans on or Yves Saint Laurent. We have to move, but we don't have to dance. I call the have-tos activities functional and don't have tos stylistic. Style, again, just to remind you, it's very similar to what I meant by the idea of mannerism. The first thing is to note that the whole bundle of stylistic activities is exactly what we would describe as a culture. So, which brings me to something that those who have had the patience to read the paper perhaps recognize. This is an attempt to map this the degree of detachment of memory from the body proper, that I think is probably the most interesting way of that provides for the way of analysis of capacities under the umbrella of the affect theory. So let's just look at this diagram. So S and R, they stand for stimulus and response. So the animal famously, features in many anthropological works, including the one of Gregory Bateson, is the idea of tick that lives in the three-dimensional world. It's only concerned about three affects, that is to climb the tree, wait for the hot-blooded animal, jump on it, and suck on its blood. That's it. It's stimulus response. The animal comes, it drops from the tree, the animal is not there, it stays there, even if it takes 20 years of waiting. So you could say that it is very close to, well, kind of almost like an automaton. We can see this in terms of if then. If the animal's there, then it drops on it. With cat, and anybody who has a cat for a pet, so that was tick. I'm ahead of myself, but I'm trying to get through all this. So when it comes to cats, it's slightly different. So that's why I place it in the middle of the diagram, because you can see the distance between the stimulus and response is a bit broader, because cat is capable of play, and play belongs to the what if and not if then. It's not, and this is why Bateson in one of his beautiful essays says that the cat's nip is not a bite. So it knows that when it bites, it's kind of, it's a play. It's a what if, let's do this, and then he see what the interlocutor might do, and so on. So there is already, you could say that, see this in terms of inserting the interval between the stimulus and response. And you probably realize that I'm here already tackling the chestnut, tough chestnut of the mechanistic tendencies in architecture. So we tend to privilege one kind of causality, namely mechanical causality, that brings the stimulus and response in this kind of very close proximity. But I would like to say that intelligence could be described as the capacity to insert the interval between the stimulus and response, or between the perception and action. This is what the P and A stand for. So when it comes to again, I really want to say that I'm not, I really want to say that this is not about human exceptionalism. I'm talking about the capacity that we have equipped ourselves with by way of exosomatization with the tools and everything, so much so that now the stimulus and response, the interval that is inserted between the stimulus and response, or perception and action, is not only broadened, but it's also could be reversed, so that we are, in terms of algorithms, we're always talking about the causal efficacy, but in terms, so I want to distinguish between the causes with patterns and B causes. This is a neologism. B cause is something that is that has a capacity to lure, to attract. So you could, in that sense, you can say that action can come before the perception. So we can flip these poles. So it becomes really much more convoluted and interesting. So that's what is meant by these arrows pointing in both directions. So it's not just in one direction. So let me just read this. So the main difference between physical beings and the most complex organisms does not probably derive from the instantaneity or the absence of memory in the former, but from a lack of detachment of this memory. So the degree of detachment, which in physical beings is always inherent to the rhythm of activity. That is to say, a tick is always in its vital space, and of course, by the moment we reach the bottom of this diagram, we are referring to the transspatial reserve, something that is not it does not belong to the vital present. It exceeds it. And this comes from Ruyer, and that's why he calls his major work Neofinalism. That is to say, something that is for quite some time been a blind spot again, because we, in terms of causation, we would privilege causal, the efficient cause. That's a problem of mechanicism. And now, when we think about the finalism, we are thinking also about how is it that we can actually reverse and take into account the final cause, so that it loses its stigma. Oh, I have to really rush now. So, in other words, what I've been trying to tell you, that by developing these tools, the Flintstone, it also demanded. It coincides with the encephalization, the growth of the brain, because now the what if demands a kind of capacity to weigh options, and so from this point of view, we can redefine the brain as the machine that has the capacity to dis-automatize its functioning. And I was trying to come up with a good example of this, and then I was reminded when I taught my children to ride a bicycle, and that was fine. But then I freaked out at the moment where my son told me that he wants to go to his football training by himself on a bicycle. And I'm thinking, okay, did I sufficiently automatized all of his behavior? So that is to say, he knows all the rules. You follow the bicycle lane. That's automatic. You come to the traffic light, you wait until the green light is on, then you go. But of course, we all know the moment you get on your bike, there is a moving truck, which means that the lane is occupied. The traffic light is broken. And at that point, he cannot rely on automizing functions. He needs to employ his brain precisely in terms of dis-automizing. And that is to what if now? What happens now? I can't rely on my knowledge of if then. If the light is green, then I go. Now there is no light. And I think the brain produces itself. I think Stavros did spend some time describing this from the idea of, from the Ruyerian point of view. So, and which brings me to the next point, which I think connects my talk possibly with that of my interlocutor. Let me just get back to my notes, because I shouldn't be improvising. So I think Arman will maybe find a point of connection here. This comes directly from Stigler. Average speed of nervous system is around 50 meters per second. And of course, the digital network optical cables, they run at 200 million meters per second. In other words, network is 4 million times faster than our body, which is to say some decisions are made at that speed, which is completely beyond us. I mean, we simply cannot comprehend what the hell is going on. Luckily, thinking operates even at a higher speed than the speed of light. It's virtually infinite. But of course, by thinking, I don't mean the application of rules. Thinking is about, it's caused by a genuine encounter, by the necessity for the knowledge to be, as it were, we have to be provoked into thinking. So there is a kind of problem here between how to not dismiss automation, but also allow for the possibility of dis-automation. And this, according to Stigler, is the task of thinking, noesis. And it falls under the idea of Negan Topology, to produce new knowledge so that the possible future is not dependent on proletarization of thinking, of knowledge. That is to say, finding the lowest common denominator so to produce wealth, but it has to be about the production of new knowledge. I see I'm running out. Give me just one more minute. This is Seth already said that she was expecting a product placement, but this is not for footprint. It is something. It's for well, it is for footprint. It is, but it's also a greater project. Two of our colleagues got the assignment of, and they luckily they happily accepted, to get in touch with Antoinette Ruyer, who has. I think he might have coined this term, algorithmic governance, and she was. I got this permission from Lila yesterday to show you just a few of her manifesto-like lines, where she's arguing against reductionism, and this is. She says we have to really, be careful not to reduce citizens to consumers. We can't reduce future to optimization, because it's simply that's the problem of that simply that instead of fulfilling the promise, we're just getting ourselves in ever smaller resonance chambers. We can't reduce justice to law. We cannot reduce work to employment. I think something that Seth would very much support this ban. And we certainly cannot reduce plasticity to program and life to digital flows. In other words, public to audience, we cannot reduce the incalculable, ineffable to that which can be calculated. And the person that has influenced my work the most in this respect, in terms of how to resist any reductionist tendency, so to make our lives easier, is this gentleman Guattari. And I don't know if I still have, this is like literally 10 more slides. Seth, do I have permission?
We're kind of over time, so perhaps one more final statement.
Yes. So the final statement is we cannot, I can't, I mean, just let me run through. And because Stavros did somewhat anticipated that I would go here. The idea is that you don't have this kind of brilliant mind, a gentleman who just simply has the capacity to for utopian thought, or that in order to understand what is going on here, we cannot not take into account the territory, that is to say the body, the environment, the thought, the subjective idea of this idea of flight. How that, you know, can we are not meant to fly, but we want to fly, and then there has to be a proper flow of both energy and information, so as to codify this in terms of something that we now recognize as a flight, you know, flight of people who are not, creatures that were not meant to fly. So any attempt to reduce this incredible complexity to either of the four domains would be a complete failure. And we have to keep them, you know, all together. And that's why I'm thinking that would be probably the task for the 21st century. And that's what I meant by the allagmatic theory. Thank you for your patience, and I apologize. I was so enthusiastic about this that I could not contain my.
No, not a problem at all. This is absolutely relevant, very fascinating as well, and I believe I will leave kind of my summarizing statements for the discussion afterwards, because this already feeds so much. Well, the views that the students had or presented in their snippets, such as the thought or the comparison of blockchain, or the possible closed system of the blockchain, and comparing it to Guattari's diagram, and where does it meet, or where does it resonate, and where does it absolutely not resonate. And thinking about these laboratory conditions of perfect reproduction, and how knowledge does not, is not invented there. Knowledge is produced indeed in this frame of indeterminacy. And I mean, I believe we should leave this for the discussion afterwards. So a 5-minute break.